The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky surface of Kepler 442b as Kang Taiho stepped out of his temporary shelter. The air was thin but breathable, and the distant mountains looked purple against the orange sky. He had been working on this mining planet for 3 years now, and he still found the alien sunrise beautiful. Taiho was 34 years old and had strong hands from years of construction work. His black hair was always messy from wearing his work helmet, and his clothes were permanently stained with dirt and machine oil. He was the foreman of Mining Station Alpha 7, which meant he was in charge of building new sections of the mining facility. Today was supposed to be simple. His team needed to clear away some old rocks to make room for a new storage building. Taiho picked up his tools and walked toward the work site, where his crew was already waiting. "Good morning, boss," called out one of his workers. "The explosives team finished their work yesterday. The rocks should be easy to move now." Taiho nodded and looked at the area they needed to clear. Large chunks of stone were scattered everywhere, and some had created small caves and hiding spots. His job was to make sure everything was safe before the building crews arrived. He started moving smaller rocks with his anti-gravity lift tool. The work was steady and peaceful. His team worked quietly, each person focused on their task. Taiho liked these quiet moments. Building things made him feel good, like he was making the universe a little better. Around noon, Taiho was moving a particularly large boulder when he heard something strange. It was a small sound, almost like crying, but not quite human. He stopped working and listened carefully. There it was again, a soft whimpering sound coming from behind the rocks. "Hey, everyone take a lunch break," Taiho called to his team. "I need to check something." His workers were happy to rest and walked back toward the main building. Taiho waited until they were gone, then moved closer to where the sound was coming from. He pushed aside some smaller rocks and found a narrow opening that led into a small cave. The whimpering was definitely coming from inside. Taiho got down on his hands and knees and crawled into the opening. His helmet light cut through the darkness, and what he saw made his heart skip a beat. 3 small creatures were huddled together in the back of the cave. They were unlike anything Taiho had ever seen, but he knew immediately what they were. Vorthak cubs. Even as babies, he could see the signs. The scaled skin, the sharp little claws, the way their eyes reflected his helmet light. Everyone in the galaxy knew about Vorthaks. They were the most dangerous predators on dozens of worlds. Adults stood, 8 feet tall, and could tear through metal with their claws. They hunted in packs and showed no mercy to any other species. Mining companies had strict rules about Vorthaks. If you found them, you called security immediately and they were eliminated. But these were just babies. The largest one was maybe the size of a house cat, and they were clearly scared and hungry. Their scales were dull and they looked weak. Taiho could see no sign of adult Vorthaks anywhere. These cubs were alone. The babies looked at him with large, frightened eyes. One of them, braver than the others, took a small step toward him and made a soft chirping sound. It was not the sound of a monster. It was the sound of a scared child. Taiho's mind raced. Company policy was clear. He should call security right now. These creatures would grow up to be killers. Every sensible person would say he should walk away and let nature take its course. But Taiho thought about his own childhood. He had grown up in an orphanage after his parents died in a transport accident. He knew what it felt like to be alone and scared. He knew what it was like to need someone to care for you. The brave little cub took another step toward him and chirped again. Without thinking, Taiho reached out his hand. The cub sniffed his fingers, then gently licked them with a tiny tongue. Its skin felt warm and surprisingly soft. "What am I doing?" Taiho whispered to himself. But even as he asked the question, he was already making his decision. He looked around the cave and found an old piece of cloth that might have been part of a nest. He spread it on the ground and gently picked up the first cub. It was heavier than it looked, but did not struggle. The other 2 cubs watched nervously as he placed their sibling on the cloth. One by one, he gathered all 3 cubs onto the makeshift blanket. They huddled together, looking up at him with curious eyes. The brave one chirped again, and the others made similar sounds. "Okay, little ones," Taiho said quietly. "I guess you are coming with me." He carefully wrapped the cubs in the cloth and crawled out of the cave. The adult worksite was still empty. His crew was still at lunch. Taiho looked around to make sure no one was watching, then hurried toward his personal quarters. His living space was small, but private. It had a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. Most importantly, it had a lock that only he could open. Taiho set the cubs down on his bed and looked at them properly for the first time. They were actually quite beautiful. Their scales were dark green with lighter patterns, and their eyes were intelligent and alert. The largest one was clearly the leader. It kept positioning itself between Taiho and the other two. The smallest one had brighter coloring and seemed more curious about everything. The middle one was quiet but watched everything carefully. "I need names for you," Taiho said. He thought for a moment. "You," he pointed to the largest one, "will be Do-hyun. You look brave." The cub tilted its head as if it understood. "And you," he looked at the quiet one, "will be Minho. You seem smart." Finally, he looked at the smallest one. "And you are Suman. You are small, but I think you are tough." As if responding to their names, all three cubs made soft, chirping sounds. Taiho realized he had just made a decision that could ruin his life. If anyone found out what he had done, he would lose his job and probably go to prison. These creatures were supposed to be monsters. But looking at their innocent faces, Taiho could not bring himself to regret his choice. Maybe everyone was wrong about Vorthax. Maybe they just needed someone to care for them. "Well, little ones," he said, "I guess we are family now." 18 months had passed since Taiho found the three Vorthak cubs, and his life had become both wonderful and terrifying. Do-hyun, Minho, and Suman were no longer tiny babies. They now stood nearly 5 feet tall and were stronger than most adult humans. But they were still his children, and he loved them more than he had ever thought possible. Keeping them secret had been the hardest thing Taiho had ever done. In the beginning, it was easier because they were small and quiet. He could keep them in his quarters during the day and let them play quietly while he was at work. But as they grew larger and more active, hiding them became much more difficult. The only person who knew his secret was Park Ji-won, his assistant and the station's xenobiologist. Ji-won had discovered the cubs by accident 6 months ago when she came to his quarters with some urgent paperwork. Instead of reporting him, she had stared at the 3 young Vorthax for a long moment, then quietly asked, "Do you need help taking care of them?" Since then, Ji-won had become like a second parent to the cubs. She brought them food, helped design games to keep them entertained, and even started teaching them basic science. Her background in alien biology made her invaluable in understanding what the cubs needed to grow healthy and strong. "They are not like what the textbooks say," Ji-won told Taiho one evening as they watched the 3 Vorthax solve a complex puzzle together. "Every scientific paper says Vorthax are mindless killing machines, but look at them. They work together, they solve problems, they even show emotions." It was true. The cubs had developed personalities that amazed both humans every day. Do-hyun had become the protector of the group. He was always the first to investigate new sounds or check if areas were safe. When maintenance workers came near their hiding spots, Do-hyun would position himself between his siblings and any potential threat. Minho had proven to be incredibly intelligent. He loved to watch Taiho work and had somehow learned to understand construction blueprints. Several times Minho had pointed out problems in building plans that human engineers had missed. He could spot structural weaknesses just by looking at drawings, and his suggestions always improved the final buildings. Sumin was the smallest but also the most perceptive. She seemed to understand human emotions better than her brothers. When Taiho was stressed about work, Sumin would curl up next to him and make soft, comforting sounds. She could also sense danger in ways that surprised everyone. Twice, she had alerted them to equipment failures before any alarms went off. The cubs had learned to speak some basic human words, though they preferred to communicate with a complex system of chirps, growls, and body language that Taiho and Ji-won had learned to understand. They called Taiho Papa in their own way, and they called Ji-won Aunt Ji. But keeping them hidden was becoming almost impossible. The cubs were now too large to stay in Taiho's quarters all day. They needed exercise and stimulation. Taiho had started taking them to abandoned sections of the mining facility at night, where they could run and play without being seen. During these nighttime adventures, something interesting had happened. The cubs had begun showing protective behavior toward the human workers. When they encountered sleeping workers in the lower levels, the cubs would quietly stand guard until the humans woke up safely. They seemed to understand that these people were part of Taiho's pack and deserved protection. One night, an accident in the lower mining tunnels had trapped 2 workers under fallen rocks. Taiho had brought the cubs with him to investigate the emergency, thinking the area would be empty. Instead, they found the trapped workers, and without any instruction from Taiho, the 3 cubs had immediately begun moving rocks with their natural strength. They worked for hours until the humans were free. The rescued workers had been unconscious and never saw their rescuers clearly in the darkness. They credited their survival to emergency mining equipment, but Taiho and Jiwon knew the truth. The cubs had saved human lives. These incidents made Taiho proud but also worried. Each day that passed made discovery more likely. The cubs were getting larger and harder to hide. They needed more food, more space, and more activities to keep them happy. The food situation had become particularly challenging. Adult Vorthax were carnivores, but the cubs seemed to enjoy a mixed diet. Jiwon had discovered they loved the protein, rations that came with human meals, but they also enjoyed fruits and vegetables that grew in the station's greenhouse. Getting enough food for 3 growing Vorthax without anyone noticing required careful planning and creative thinking. Taiho had also started teaching the cubs about human values without really thinking about it. He taught them to be gentle with smaller creatures, to help others when possible, and to only use their strength when necessary. The cubs seemed to understand these lessons instinctively, as if they had been waiting for someone to show them how to be good. "Sometimes I wonder if we have been wrong about Vorthax all along," Jiwon said one day as they watched Suman carefully tend to an injured bird she had found. "Maybe they are not naturally evil. Maybe they just never had anyone to teach them how to be anything else." The cubs had also developed a strong sense of loyalty to the mining station and its workers. They seemed to consider the entire facility their territory, but in a protective way rather than a possessive way. Taiho had noticed them watching the perimeter at night, as if they were standing guard against potential threats. But their peaceful life was about to be disrupted. Corporate Inspector Lee Bora had announced her arrival for a routine inspection of the facility. These inspections happened every 2 years and involved checking every section of the station, including personal quarters. Taiho spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to hide 3 5-foot-tall Vorthax during a thorough inspection. Jiwon helped him design temporary hiding spots in unused storage areas, but they both knew it would be nearly impossible to keep the cubs hidden for the 3 days the inspection would last. The cubs seemed to sense the tension in their human family. They became quieter and more alert, staying closer to Taiho whenever possible. Do-hyun, in particular, seemed to understand that something was wrong and spent more time watching the entrances to their hiding places. "We will figure this out," Taiho promised them the night before Inspector Bora was scheduled to arrive. "We are family, and families take care of each other." The 3 cubs looked at him with their intelligent eyes and made soft sounds of agreement. They trusted him completely, and Taiho was determined not to let them down. As he watched them settle down for the night, Taiho realized how much his life had changed. 18 months ago, he had been a lonely construction worker who spent his evenings reading technical manuals and watching old movies. Now he was a father to 3 extraordinary creatures who had taught him more about love and family than he had ever imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, his family was safe and together. That was enough for now. Inspector Lee Bora had been on Mining Station Alpha 7 for 2 days, and so far Taiho's plan was working. The 3 Vorthax were hidden in an unused storage facility in the lower levels, with Jiwon bringing them food and keeping them entertained, with puzzle games and educational videos, but Taiho could see that his children were getting restless. They were used to more freedom, and being confined in a small space was making them anxious. Do-hyun had started pacing, Minho was scratching, patterns on the walls, and Suman kept making worried sounds whenever she heard footsteps in the corridors above. "Just one more day," Tejo whispered to them during his evening visit. "Then the inspector will leave and everything will go back to normal." The cubs looked at him with trusting eyes, but he could see they were struggling. They had never been separated from him for this long before, and they clearly did not understand why they had to hide. Inspector Bora was a stern woman in her 50s who took her job very seriously. She had already checked the construction records, reviewed safety protocols, and interviewed several workers. So far, she seemed satisfied with the station's operations, but she still had to complete her inspection of the personal quarters. "Tomorrow morning, I will need to check all personal living spaces," she announced to the station's senior staff. "This is standard procedure. Please make sure your quarters are accessible." Tejo's heart sank, but he nodded along with everyone else. His quarters would pass inspection easily. G1 had helped him remove any trace of the cubs' presence. But the stress of the situation was wearing on everyone involved. That night, Tejo barely slept. He kept thinking about what would happen if they were discovered. He would certainly lose his job and face criminal charges. G1 would be in trouble too. But worst of all, his children would be taken away from him, and he knew what the corporation would do to them. The next morning started normally. Inspector Bora began her tour of the personal quarters early, working her way systematically through the station. Tejo tried to focus on his regular work, but his hands were shaking as he reviewed construction reports. Around noon, everything changed. The first sign of trouble was the emergency alarm. Its loud, piercing sound echoed throughout the station, and red warning lights began flashing in every corridor. Tejo dropped his reports and ran toward the control center, where a crowd of workers was already gathering around the communication screens. "This is Commander Park of the Stellar Mining Consortium," a harsh voice announced over the speakers. "Mining Station Alpha 7 is now under our control. All personnel will gather in the main assembly area immediately. Anyone who resists will be eliminated." Tejo's blood ran cold. The Stellar Mining Consortium was a rival company that had been trying to claim rights to Kepler 442b for years. They were known for using violent methods to take over valuable mining operations. Through the station's external cameras, Tejo could see armed soldiers in black uniforms moving through the corridors. They were carrying military-grade weapons and seemed prepared to kill anyone who opposed them. Inspector Bora immediately took charge of the situation. "Everyone stay calm," she ordered. "Move to the assembly area as instructed. Do not give them any reason to hurt you." As the workers began moving toward the main assembly area, Tejo's mind raced. His children were still hidden in the lower storage facility. They would have heard the alarms and felt the vibrations of soldiers moving through the station. They must be terrified and confused. The assembly area was a large open space where the entire station population could gather for emergencies. As people filed in, Tejo could see the fear on their faces. Many of the workers had families back on other worlds, and they were clearly worried about what would happen to them. The leader of the attacking force was a tall man with cold eyes and expensive military gear. He stood on a raised platform and looked down at the assembled workers with obvious contempt. "My name is Colonel Han," he announced. "Your corporate masters have been mining valuable resources that rightfully belong to the Stellar Mining Consortium. Today we are taking back what is ours." Inspector Bora stepped forward bravely. "This is an illegal invasion. The mining rights to this planet were legally purchased and registered with the Galactic Council." Colonel Han smiled coldly. "Legal ownership can change very quickly in the Outer Rim territories. Your corporate protection is far away, and we are here now." He gestured to his soldiers, who began separating the workers into groups. It quickly became clear that they planned to take some people prisoner, while forcing others to continue working the mines under new management. Tejo found himself placed in a group near the back of the assembly area. From his position, he could see that some of the soldiers were moving toward the lower levels of the station, the same area where his children were hidden. Panic filled his chest. The cubs would not understand what was happening. They might try to defend themselves or Worse, they might try to find him. Either way, they would be discovered and killed. As if sensing his thoughts, he heard a sound that made his heart stop. It was faint, but unmistakable, the distinctive growl of an angry Vorthak. The sound was coming from the lower levels. Several soldiers in the assembly area heard it too and immediately became alert. Colonel Han frowned and spoke into his communication device. "Report from level 3. What was that sound?" A scratchy voice replied through the speakers. "Unknown, sir. We are investigating some kind of animal sounds in the storage areas." Taiho felt sick. His children were about to be discovered, and there was nothing he could do to protect them. He looked around desperately, trying to think of some way to help them, but he was surrounded by armed soldiers. Then everything happened at once. The lights in the assembly area suddenly went out, plunging everyone into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting eerie red shadows everywhere. Before anyone could react, 3 massive shapes burst through the ventilation grates near the ceiling. Do-yun, Minho, and Sumin had grown far larger than Taiho had realized. In the red emergency lighting, they looked terrifying, their scales gleaming, their claws extended, their eyes glowing with reflected light. They moved with perfect coordination, dropping from the ceiling and landing among the confused soldiers. But instead of attacking randomly like wild animals, the 3 Vorthaks fought with intelligence and purpose. Do-hyun went straight for Colonel Han, moving faster than any human could follow. Minho targeted the soldiers who were threatening the workers, disarming them with precise strikes that avoided serious injury. Sumin positioned herself between the Yar attacking force and the group of workers that included families with children. The soldiers tried to fight back, but they had never faced anything like this. Vorthaks were supposed to be mindless predators, but these 3 fought like trained warriors with a clear mission. They seemed to know exactly who was a threat and who was innocent. In less than 5 minutes, the entire attacking force was either unconscious or fleeing toward their ships. Colonel Han lay on the ground, alive but badly bruised, with Do-yun standing over him protectively. The assembly area fell silent except for heavy breathing and the soft growling sounds the cubs made. When they were alert, the workers stared in amazement and terror at the 3 massive creatures that had just saved their lives. Inspector Bora was the first to speak. She looked directly at Taiho, understanding immediately what had happened. "These are yours," she said quietly. Taiho stepped forward slowly, his hands raised to show he was not a threat. "Do-hyun, Minho, Sumin," he called softly. "It is okay now. Come here." The 3 Vorthaks immediately relaxed at the sound of his voice. They moved toward him, their aggressive postures changing to something that looked almost like relief. Do-hyun reached him first and made a soft chirping sound that clearly meant Papa. The entire room watched in stunned silence as the 3 deadly predators gently surrounded their human father, seeking comfort and reassurance like children who had been scared by a nightmare. Inspector Bora stared at the scene for a long moment, then said, "Kang Taeho, I think we need to have a very serious conversation." 3 months after the attack on Mining Station Alpha 7, Taiho found himself sitting in the most important courtroom in the galaxy. The Galactic Council's Court of Interspecies Affairs was a massive chamber with seats for representatives from hundreds of different worlds. Today, every seat was filled and billions more were watching the proceedings through live broadcasts. The case had become known throughout the galaxy as the Vorthak trial, and it had divided public opinion completely. Some people saw Taiho as a hero who had made a breakthrough in interspecies relations. Others saw him as a dangerous criminal who had violated fundamental safety laws and put innocent lives at risk. Taiho wore his best clothes, but he still felt out of place in the Tandar Grand Courtroom. He was just a construction worker who had made a choice to care for 3 abandoned children. He never expected that choice to lead him here, facing judges who would decide not just his fate, but the future of human Vorthak relations. The prosecutor was Kim Hyun-woo, a sharp-faced man who represented the corporate interests that wanted Taiho punished. His voice was cold and precise as he presented his case. "Members of the council," Kim Hyun-woo began, The defendant has violated every safety protocol designed to protect sentient life in our galaxy. Vorthax are classified as apex predators with no capacity for civilized behavior. By raising these creatures, Kang Taiho has created living weapons that could kill dozens of people without warning. He gestured toward a large screen that showed images of Vorthax attacks from other worlds. The pictures were horrifying: torn metal, destroyed buildings, and the aftermath of encounters between humans and wild Vorthax. The defendant may claim that his actions were motivated by compassion, the prosecutor continued. But the result is the same. He has created a dangerous situation that threatens the safety of everyone around him. The law exists for good reasons, and it must be enforced. Taiho's defense attorney was Yoon Soo-jin, a brilliant lawyer who specialized in interspecies law. She was young, but had a reputation for taking difficult cases and finding creative solutions. She had volunteered to represent Taiho when no one else would take the case. Members of the council, Yoon Soo-jin said, when it was her turn to speak, "We are here today because everything we thought we knew about Vorthax was wrong. The evidence will show that these creatures are not mindless killers. They are intelligent beings capable of love, loyalty, and moral reasoning." She presented videos that Ji-won had secretly recorded over the past 2 years. The council watched in amazement as the recording showed Do-hyun, Min-ho, and Soo-min solving complex problems, showing concern for injured animals, and working together with remarkable coordination. "These are not the actions of savage beasts," Yoon Soo-jin argued. "These are the actions of intelligent individuals who have been raised with love and guidance. The defendant did not create weapons. He raised children. But the most compelling evidence was yet to come." During the trial, Do-hyun, Min-ho, and Soo-min were kept in a special holding facility designed for dangerous aliens. They were treated well but remained under constant guard. The 3 Vorthax refused to cooperate with anyone except Taiho and Ji-won, which only seemed to prove the prosecutor's point about their unpredictable nature. However, their behavior during confinement continued to surprise everyone. Instead of being aggressive or destructive, they showed concern for their guards' well-being. When one guard became ill, Soo-min alerted the medical staff by making specific sounds at the security camera. When another guard was injured during routine maintenance, Min-ho helped him reach his emergency communicator. The turning point in the trial came during the 3rd week of proceedings. The council had arranged for a school group to visit the courthouse as part of an educational program. Among the children was 6-year-old Choi Dae-hyun, whose father worked at mining station Alpha 7. During the tour, little Dae-hyun became curious about a restricted area and wandered away from his group. He found his way to an observation deck that overlooked the courthouse's central atrium. The deck was supposed to be safe, but a recent maintenance error had weakened the safety barriers. As Dae-hyun leaned against the barrier to get a better view, it collapsed. The little boy fell into the atrium, a drop of nearly 30 feet onto hard stone floors. The tour guide screamed, and alarms began sounding throughout the building. Human rescue teams immediately mobilized, but the atrium was designed in a way that made quick access difficult. It would take them several minutes to reach the injured child, and medical scanners showed that Dae-hyun had suffered serious injuries that required immediate attention. While the rescue teams worked frantically to find a way into the atrium, something unexpected happened. The security cameras captured everything as the 3 Vorthax broke out of their holding facility with coordinated precision. They moved through the courthouse's security systems like they had been planning the escape for weeks, but instead of fleeing the building, they headed straight for the atrium where the injured child lay unconscious. The entire courtroom watched the live security feed in stunned silence as the 3 creatures entered the atrium through a ventilation shaft that no human could have accessed. They moved quickly but carefully, and their actions showed clear intelligence and purpose. Do-hyun used his strength to clear debris that had fallen on the child. Min-ho examined the boy's injuries with surprising gentleness, then used his knowledge of anatomy to stabilize the child's position. Soo-min stood guard, watching for additional dangers while making soft sounds that seemed designed to comfort the unconscious boy. Most remarkably, When the human rescue teams finally reached the atrium, the three Vorthax did not retreat or become defensive. Instead, they carefully transferred the injured child to the medical personnel, then voluntarily stepped back to allow the humans to work. The rescue was broadcast live across the galaxy, and billions of people watched as the three monsters gently helped save a human child's life. When the medical team confirmed that the boy would make a full recovery, the Vorthax made soft, happy sounds that could only be interpreted as relief and joy. After ensuring the child was safe, Do-hyun, Min-ho, and Sumin walked calmly back to their holding facility and allowed themselves to be secured again without any resistance. The courtroom was completely silent for several minutes after the broadcast ended. Finally, one of the council judges spoke. "In 60 years of interspecies law," she said slowly, "I have never seen anything like this. These creatures broke out of a maximum security facility, not to escape, but to save a child they had never met." Prosecutor Kim Hyun-woo tried to argue that the rescue was just instinctive behavior, but his words sounded hollow after what everyone had witnessed. The images of the three Vorthax gently caring for the injured child had already spread across the galaxy, changing public opinion in real time. The defense attorney presented her closing arguments the next day. "Members of the council," Yoon Soo-jin said, "the evidence speaks for itself. These beings are not monsters. They are individuals with the capacity for growth, learning, and moral choice. They chose to save a life when they could have chosen to escape." She looked directly at Taiho, who was sitting with tears in his eyes. The defendant made a choice based on compassion 2 years ago. Yesterday, his children proved that choice was right. The trial was recessed while the council deliberated. As they waited for the verdict, Taiho was finally allowed to visit his children in their holding facility. The reunion was emotional, with all three Vorthax surrounding him and making soft sounds of happiness and relief. "I am so proud of you," he whispered to them. "You saved that little boy's life." Do-hyun, Min-ho, and Sumin looked at him with their intelligent eyes, and he could see that they understood the importance of what they had done. They had proven to the galaxy that they were more than just predators. They were his children, and they were good. 6 years had passed since the trial that changed everything, and Taiho could hardly believe how much his life had transformed. He stood on the observation deck of New Kepler City, watching the morning shift begin in the bustling settlement below. The sight still amazed him every day. Where mining station Alpha 7 had once been a simple industrial facility, there was now a thriving multicultural city. Humans worked alongside Vorthax in the expanded mining operations. Taiho could see mixed construction crews building new residential towers, with human engineers working directly with Vorthax laborers whose natural strength made many jobs easier and safer. The trial had ended with Taiho's complete exoneration and the establishment of what became known as the Kepler Protocols, new galactic laws governing interspecies adoption and integration. He had been appointed as the first director of interspecies relations for the Outer Rim territories, a position he never would have imagined for himself. But the real changes were in his family. Do-hyun was now fully grown, standing 8 feet tall with the powerful build of an adult Vorthax. But instead of being a mindless predator, he had become the leader of the Kepler Security Force, a mixed species unit that protected frontier settlements throughout the sector. His natural protective instincts, combined with the values Taiho had taught him, made him an exceptional leader. Taiho watched through the window as Do-hyun led a training exercise for new recruits. The team included both humans and young Vorthax, and they moved together with perfect coordination. Under Do-hyun's guidance, they were practicing rescue operations, learning to work as a unified team rather than separate species. "He is teaching them well," said a familiar voice behind him. Taiho turned to see Ji-won approaching with a data pad in her hands. She had been promoted to chief xenobiologist for the entire sector and was now one of the galaxy's leading experts on interspecies relationships. Her hair was streaked with gray now, but her eyes still held the same kindness that had made her willing to help 3 scared Vorthax cubs years ago. "They all turned out better than I ever hoped," Taiho replied, smiling as he watched the training exercise. Through another window, he could see Minho working in the city's engineering center. The middle son had surprised everyone by developing not just technical skills, but also an intuitive understanding of structural engineering that amazed human professionals. His predator instincts, designed for hunting, had translated perfectly into identifying weaknesses in buildings and machines. Minho now led a team of mixed-species engineers who designed safer, more efficient structures for frontier worlds. His innovations had already saved countless lives by preventing structural failures before they happened. The irony was not lost on anyone that a creature bred for destruction had become one of the galaxy's most effective builders. "Have you seen Suman's latest report?" Jiwan asked, handing Taiho the datapad. Taiho read through the medical statistics with growing pride. Suman had become the most unexpected success story of all. Her enhanced senses, originally evolved for tracking prey, made her extraordinarily gifted at medical diagnosis. She could detect diseases and injuries that human doctors missed, often catching problems before patients even knew they were sick. She now ran the city's medical center, working with both human doctors and Vorthak healers who had learned traditional medicine from their ancestors. Her combination of scientific training and natural ability had revolutionized frontier medicine. 15 major diseases detected early this month, Taiho read aloud. 43 lives saved through preventive treatment. She is incredible. What made him proudest, though, was not their professional success, but the families they had built. Dohyun had married a female Vorthak named Yunji, who had been rescued from another planet under the new Kepler protocols. They had 2 cubs of their own now, who were being raised with the same values of protection and service that Taiho had taught their father. Minho had formed a partnership with both a human engineer named Hyunsu and a Vorthak mathematician named Gunwoo. Their household was unconventional by any species standards, but their collaborative work had produced some of the most innovative designs in galactic history. Suman remained single by choice, claiming that her patients were her family. But she had adopted several orphaned cubs from various species, creating a diverse household that served as a model for other mixed families throughout the sector. "The afternoon shift is starting," Jiwan observed, pointing toward the central plaza. Taiho watched as the morning workers finished their duties and the afternoon crews took over. The transition was smooth and peaceful, with different species working together as naturally as if they had always been allies rather than enemies. In the plaza, he could see the integrated nursery where the next generation was growing up together. Human children played with Vorthak cubs, Centaurian younglings, and half a dozen other species. They learned from each other, shared games and stories, and formed friendships that would shape the future of galactic civilization. The nursery had been Suman's idea, based on her observation that prejudice was learned rather than natural. Children who grew up together, she argued, would never see each other as enemies. The program had been so successful that similar nurseries were being established on worlds throughout the galaxy. "Do you ever regret it?" Jiwan asked quietly. "Everything you gave up to save them?" Taiho thought about the question. His old life had been simple and predictable. He had been a construction foreman who spent his evenings alone, reading technical manuals and watching entertainment programs. He had no family, few friends, and no real purpose beyond completing his daily tasks. Now his life was complex and sometimes stressful. As director of interspecies relations, he dealt with complicated political situations, cultural misunderstandings, and the constant challenge of helping different species learn to live together. He traveled frequently, attended important meetings, and carried responsibilities that affected millions of lives. But he also had a family that loved him, work that mattered, and the knowledge that his choice to save 3 abandoned cubs had changed the course of galactic history. "I do not regret anything," he said finally. "My children taught me what family really means." As if summoned by his words, he heard familiar sounds from the corridor outside his office. Heavy footsteps, followed by voices speaking in the mixture of human words and Vorthak communication that his children used when they were together. The door opened, and all 3 of his children entered the office. Even though they were now adults with important careers and families of their own, they still made time to visit their father every day. Dohyun spoke first. his deep voice carrying the authority of command, but still holding the warmth Taiho remembered from when he was a cub. "Papa, we wanted to thank you for the new training facility funding. The recruits will benefit greatly." Minho nodded agreement, his intelligent eyes bright with enthusiasm. "The structural improvements will make it much safer for mixed species training." Aunt G's biological recommendations were particularly helpful. Suman stepped forward and gently touched Taiho's shoulder with one clawed hand, a gesture of affection that had never lost its power to move him. "Papa, the medical center received approval for expansion to 3 more worlds. Your support made the difference." Looking at his 3 children, successful, respected, loved by their communities, Taiho felt the same overwhelming pride he had experienced the day they were born in his heart, if not in reality. "You have all become more than I ever dreamed possible," he told them. "But you were always good. I just gave you the chance to show it." As the family stood together in the office overlooking New Kepler City, Taiho reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. A simple choice to save 3 abandoned children had grown into a transformation that affected billions of lives across the galaxy. The Kepler protocols had been adopted by hundreds of worlds. Interspecies adoption was now legal and encouraged. Mixed communities were flourishing throughout the frontier, and the galaxy had learned that species barriers were far less important than individual character. Outside the window, the evening shift was beginning. The lights of New Kepler City sparkled in the growing darkness, and in the distance, the transport ships that connected them to the wider galaxy prepared for departure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. There would be more orphaned children to save, more communities to build, and more barriers to break down. But tonight, Taiho was simply a father surrounded by his family, grateful for the choice he had made in a small cave on a mining planet. So many years ago, the choice to love had changed everything,